Do you think that you could catch a baseball thrown off the top of the Washington Monument? Because it would probably feel pretty similar to trying to catch that weight that I just threw. At least according to a Louisiana newspaper I found from 1908. It claims that catching a baseball falling over 500 feet down from the top of the monument would be roughly equivalent in impact to catching a 17-pound weight falling about 10 feet, which is what I just demonstrated for you right there. Now, I'm no scientist. I can't tell you for sure if that newspaper is accurate or not, but one thing I can tell you is that catching a baseball chucked off the top of the monument is no easy feat, regardless of how hard it would specifically hit. Dozens of men tried their hand at the stunt back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and almost all of them failed. But what they succeeded in doing was kicking off an epidemic of extreme baseball catching. An epidemic that I want to analyze for you today. This is a short history of baseball players trying to catch baseballs dropped from really high places, 1880 to 1940. Or, if you want a snappier title, then how about God Hates a Coward? Let's get into it. Alright, so the earliest record that I was able to find of someone trying to catch a ball thrown off the monument was from way back in 1885, which was actually before the monument had even been officially finished. Yeah, the superintendent in charge of constructing the monument had challenged a guy named Paul Hines, a center fielder for the Washington Nationals, to try his hand at catching a ball dropped from a window 530 feet up the height of the monument. So naturally, all the newspapers at the time got all over this. Like, all sorts of articles were written about the wager, including some pretty insightful analysis of how challenging actually nabbing the ball might be. Like, I especially like this one here from the Washington Star, saying that the real challenge in catching the ball probably isn't even going to be the impact, but the difficulty in tracking and staying under the ball as it free falls for 7 straight seconds. I also like this article here that refers to the Washington Monument as an unsightly pile of rock. You know, that's just like a fun little reminder that these landmarks that we take for granted nowadays were once brand new things that everybody had to get used to. Anyway though, on the day of the big drop, Paul Hines had a construction worker climb up to the top of the monument with only 3 baseballs, just 3 chances to try and win the bet. So the construction guy, he lined up the first shot, he dropped the ball, and immediately Paul Hines realized how tough this was going to be. Like, from over 500 feet in the air, the baseball looked like a tiny little pea, just barely visible up against the white monument. And that's not even mentioning the wind, which ended up blowing the ball so far off course that it just crashed on top of a nearby shed, like far away from Paul's hands. And the second drop really wasn't much better. This time it just fell into a lake. The third and final ball, though, was pretty much on target. It sailed on down from the top of the monument with Paul running and running after it, and he's reaching out his hand as far as it could possibly go, and phew, the ball just barely brushes past his fingertips and crashes into the dirt. This close, but ultimately still a failure. Or I guess, kind of a failure. See, although Paul Hines had failed to catch the baseball himself, what he had succeeded in doing is inspiring a whole ton of people to try the stunt for themselves. Like, in fact, he kind of kicked off a whole, like, golden age of people trying to grab baseballs dropped off the Washington Monument. Over the next couple of decades, dozens of players would try their hand at the feat. Like Phil Baker, who tried out the stunt just a little bit after Hines, but he really didn't do much better either. Like, the wind got a hold of the balls and just launched them downward in this, like, spiral pattern that was just impossible for Baker to track. Jim McGuire also gave it a shot, but he ended up just ducking and running away as soon as he realized how fast and hard the ball was coming down. Oh, and in 1890, an entire team of Boston League players were visiting DC, and they decided to accept the challenge. But again, nobody could get a hand on it. The entire team failed. Like, actually catching a ball dropped off the monument was proving to be way, way, way harder than you might think. And you know, the common thread between all these failed attempts is that actually predicting where the ball is gonna go is pretty much impossible. You know, it's just like coming out the window, and then the wind gets it, and then the air resistance, and then you can barely even see it way up there, and it just goes whipping all over the place. It's just really difficult to actually get underneath it. As far as I can tell, the closest that anyone got in the 1880s was a guy named Todd Unkefer, who was a catcher who played for Indianapolis. Apparently, he thought that catching the ball coming off the monument would be dead easy, and so he headed over there in 1888 to give it a try. So he put these like big, thick catcher's mitts on both hands, and then he packed the mitts all full of cotton to provide as much padding as he possibly could, and you kind of got to hand it to him. Like, he actually got pretty close. Like, he managed to get a glove on 8 or 9 baseballs in just one day. The only problem was that the balls were just coming down so hard and so fast that he just could not hold on to them. Like, his palms were getting absolutely destroyed by the repeated impact. Like, so badly that even with all that extra padding, he still had to sit out the next few games that his team played because his hands had taken such a beating from trying to grab the falling ball. Like, pretty crazy, right? One interesting thing I noticed in all these articles too is that eyewitnesses to all these failed attempts would regularly attest that the balls would hit the ground and then bury themselves 2.5 inches into the dirt like a little like meteor. But still, people kept stepping up to the plate, like a guy named Billy Pop Shriver, who some people, even today, would claim was the first player to actually catch a ball dropped off the monument. You see, back in 1894, a whole bunch of newspapers ran stories claiming that somebody had finally broken the curse, that Pop Shriver had caught the ball, like he was the first success in a sea of failures. But I personally have a hard time calling this one the definite first catch off the Washington Monument. Mostly because several eyewitnesses to the event have specifically said that Shriver didn't really catch the ball. Like for example, a monument custodian who reportedly saw the drop with his own eyes said that while the ball definitely hit Shriver's glove, he just kind of half caught it and then bobbled it for a bit before it ultimately like popped out and hit the ground. And even more damning than that is a quote that I found from the actual guy who dropped the ball to Shriver. Like, he admitted 12 years later that, yeah, Shriver, he had a glove under it and maybe he had it for a second, but he definitely could not really hold on. Like, the ball came out before he had any real control over it. So maybe Shriver was the first to catch it, but it is kind of suspect to me that 2 separate eyewitnesses came out to say that Shriver wasn't actually able to keep a hold of it. So my best guess is that he got closer than anybody and he almost had it for a few seconds, but he still didn't quite catch it completely. And then the newspapers just wanted to run like a big sensational story that would grab some attention, so they just printed that he had caught it. I don't know though, it's hard to say for sure. And so the months just kept rolling on with nobody able to catch the ball until 1908. When a new challenger decided to try his hand at the monument drop. A man named Charles Gabby Street, a catcher for the Washington Senators. Gabby had apparently decided to give it a shot solely because of a challenge from the team manager. Like, one day the manager was just rattling off the names of all the people who had tried and failed to catch the baseball, and Street heard that and was just like, all right, well, let's just head over there and I'll catch it for you. And so word spread that another major league player was thinking about trying to catch, and before Gabby knew it, there he was, standing at the base of the monument on a summer day in 1908 with literally hundreds of spectators surrounding him. I guess all those people must have really felt confident that Gabby was tough enough for the job, and it's hard to blame them, because after all, Gabby Street once ran away from home at the age of 15 to go fight in the Spanish-American War. And now here he is again, in another war. This time against history, against the limitations of the human body, against the monument itself, imposing high and bright against the sky. With a cruel smile, the monument looks down at the newest fool who would dare to raise a glove against its crushing might. But Gabby wasn't scared. He lined up his mitt, he tilted his head towards the sky, and he watched as that first ball fell down from the monument. Down it tumbled, gently rolling through the sky, down, 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 until kablam! It smashes into the pavement and explodes into a million pieces. Like, the impact sounds like someone had just fired off a revolver. Journalists remark that baseball would have killed Gabby if it had hit him in the face. But Gabby Street doesn't falter. He knows how many have failed before him, and he simply raises up his catcher's mitt to try again. But he doesn't really have any more luck with the second ball, or the third ball, or the fourth, or the fifth, and eventually 12 balls have been dropped off the monument, with none of them landing in Gabby's glove. Much like those who tried and failed before, a whole bunch of different issues are coming up here. Like, sometimes the ball hits the side of the monument, and sometimes the wind gets a hold of it and throws it off track, and most importantly, it is just really tough to keep your eye on the ball. Like, you gotta like have your head tilted way back, and you're running all around trying to stay under it, and the sun is like glaring right in your eyes. And Gabby just eventually decided that he was never gonna catch a ball trying it like this. Like, looking up and staring into the sun was just making him feel all dizzy and all disoriented. So he sat for a moment and he thought about how he could approach this problem, like how he could catch the ball without having to look up at the sun the entire time. And he thought, and he thought, and he thought, and he eventually came up with the most insane solution that you could ever imagine. Like, here's what he did. First, he moved to another side of the monument where the wind wasn't nearly as strong, which is smart, right? Because that way the arc of the ball is way easier to predict. But that alone isn't gonna solve the bigger problem of Gabby getting all dizzy trying to stare up in the air, right? So what he wanted to do was to stand there with his head bent down, facing the ground, while the ball fell most of the way down. And then he would have someone yell to him when the ball was right overhead, and then he'd real quick just whip his head up and whip his mitt up and try to catch it. Is that not the craziest plan that you've ever heard? Like, he's got baseballs shattering into a million pieces all around him, sounding like cannon blasts hitting the ground, and he wants to stand there, not even looking, and then whip his head up at the last second and try to catch the ball in like a microsecond. Oh, and I almost forgot the craziest part of this plan, which is that it actually worked. Yeah, he actually caught the ball like that. Straight up. He had a guy yell out when the ball was only 50 feet overhead, and then he whipped his head up, stuck his glove out, and caught the ball. The first time that anyone ever caught a baseball thrown off the monument, they weren't even looking for like 90% of the fall. And this isn't just like some folk legend or like journalist exaggerating something either. Like, I found plenty of interviews with Gabby himself where he says that is how he caught the ball. Like, after all that time, all those failures, that is really how the job finally gets done. And just to hammer home like how dangerous this was, Gabby Street actually fell to the ground from the impact of the ball hitting his glove. Like, even through the 3-inch catcher's mitt that he was wearing, Gabby said the ball hit way harder than any pitch that he'd ever had to catch in his entire career. But hey, Gabby Street had done it. He had broken the curse, and people went absolutely wild over it. Like, about 1 million newspaper articles were written about the event, and including all sorts of little drawings of Gabby making the heroic catch. Like, I even found one sports writer who wrote this like entire parody dramatic opera about the catch. Like, pretty wild. Oh, and immediately after Gabby held onto that ball, a man ran out of the crowd and offered him $500 for the souvenir. And remember that groundskeeper who said that the other guy, Shriver, didn't actually hold onto the ball? Well, apparently that exact same groundskeeper actually gave Gabby Street the original blueprints for the monument as like a token for being the first person to catch the ball. Pretty cool, right? Gabby, he held on to those blueprints and the ball he had caught for decades after the event. Like, to him, they were treasures, like reminders of his triumph. And also reminders of the new era of extreme catching that Gabby Street had just kicked off. Like, see, in catching that ball dropped off the monument, Gabby had just begun a silver age of high velocity baseball drops. Like, everybody suddenly wanted to go bigger and better, to raise the stakes higher and higher. And eventually the next couple decades just became like a kind of loosely connected series of people catching baseballs dropped from really high places, culminating with a story so grotesque that it completely ended the trend right then and there. So please, for part 2 of this video, let me walk you through the silver age of catching baseballs dropped from really high places. So let's kick things off with Billy Sullivan, who caught 3 balls dropped off the Washington Monument just 2 years after Gabby had caught 1. It took like 30 years for anybody to get 1, and then 2 years for somebody to get 3. But, you know, drops from the Washington Monument had begun to feel a bit stale. People wanted to move on and try catching baseballs thrown off of other places. Like, for example, an airplane. Yeah, in the 1910s and 20s, there was like a whole ton of stories of players catching baseballs dropped from low-flying planes as publicity stunts. Like, even Babe Ruth got in on the action back in 1926 when he grabbed a ball dropped out of a plane flying 200 feet overhead. Perhaps the most famous of these plane drop stories, though, happened in 1914 with a man named Wilbert Robinson as the intended target of the drop. As the story goes, Wilbert was waiting in a baseball stadium when the pilot flew overhead and tossed out the baseball. So Wilbert, he hustled and he ran and he tried to get underneath it, and he misjudged its trajectory, and the ball just slammed right into his chest, knocking him to the ground. And as Wilbert stood up, he put a hand to his torso and realized that he was soaked with blood. Oh my God, the baseball must have caved in my rib cage. My internal organs must have exploded. There's blood and guts everywhere. And wait a minute. Why does this blood smell like citrus? And why is this blood all orange colored? And oh my God, wait a minute. This isn't blood. This is grapefruit juice. Yeah, somehow a grapefruit got switched out for the baseball. Like, there's a whole lot of conflicting sources out there on exactly how this happened, but the typical story is that the pilot just forgot to bring a baseball and instead chucked a grapefruit out as a last-minute replacement. Despite the plane trend, though, there were still plenty of baseballs being chucked off of buildings, too. Like in 1938, when 10,000 people watched Frankie Pitlack and Hank Health catch balls thrown off the top of the Cleveland Terminal Tower, which stands over 700 feet. So now we're adding an extra 200 feet onto the Washington Monument throw. And right around now in the 1930s, that's also when the West Coast started getting in on the action too. Like in 1939, for example, several players from the San Francisco Seals successfully caught balls thrown from the 437-foot tall Tower of the Sun. One of the players, Joe Sprinz, he even managed to nab 5 falling balls before the day was over. But hey, don't make the mistake of thinking that this stuff is easy just because the players are getting better at it. Like, one of those balls that Joe Sprinz caught was hurtling down so fast that it tore the glove off his hand. And even just the sight of that little white speck floating faster and faster down to earth was enough to make one of Joe Sprinz's teammates just quit after the first drop. Jesus, he said, you get hit square with one of those, you get killed. Smash cut to the other side of the continent. 4 members of the Philadelphia Phillies are standing in front of the 550-foot tall Philadelphia City Hall. Every single window has a screaming face sticking out of it. A massive crowd is roaring with delight. And the Phillies have taken out a $250,000 insurance policy on their players with an expiration date of exactly 15 minutes from now. Because during the next 15 minutes, baseballs are going to be thrown out of the top of the tower down below to be caught by the players. The key word in this instance being thrown out. These baseballs will not just be dropped. They will be flung outward and away from the building, about 200 feet forwards. And oh my God, here comes the first ball. It's flying out. It's falling, it's falling, it's falling, it's falling, and boom, it crashes into the ground and bounces 5 stories back up into the air. Oh, here comes the next ball. Falling, 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 falling. Crack! Another miss. The crowd goes crazy. The ball bounces way up in the air again. And after a few more thunderous misses, one of the guys just hands his glove to his teammate and says, I'm married. I'm not going to get myself killed trying to catch one of these balls. And the guy he handed the mitt to was a dude named Dave Cobble. And there must have been some kind of like good luck in that mitt, because Dave went on to catch the 12th ball that day as it sailed down through the sky and hit right into his mitt. Again, the impact, tremendous. Like, it knocked him down to his knees and literally tore a hole in the seat of his pants as he fell. But okay. I feel like we've spent enough time with the opening acts. I'd say it's just about time for the main event. The story that inspired me to make this video. The Joe Sprinz drop of 1939. The most horrific tale you will ever hear that involves a falling baseball. Now, right off the bat, you probably recognize that name from an earlier story. Joe Sprinz was the guy that caught 5 balls thrown off the top of the San Francisco Tower of the Sun. Apparently that feat was like so impressive to the team and was so good for publicity that management decided to schedule another event, a bigger drop, a better drop, and in fact the biggest and best baseball drop of all time. What they wanted to do was to have Joe and the entire rest of the San Francisco Seals stand out in the middle of the empty baseball stadium and try to catch a baseball dropped from a blimp. They wanted to indisputably set the baseball drop record, like to make history, to etch the names of the San Francisco Seals into the big book of baseball lore forever. And so, on August 3rd, 1939, Joe Sprinz's birthday, by the way, there they were, standing in the middle of the baseball stadium, gloves on their hands, heads cocked back, looking at the big blimp floating high above them. Now, sources are conflicted on exactly how high up that blimp was, but at minimum, the thing was 800 feet in the air and potentially even 1,500 feet overhead. So, but regardless of the exact number, like, this was going to be a record. Like, without a doubt, this was going to be the highest height that anyone had ever caught a baseball from if they could actually manage to get their glove on it. And the stadium was sure excited about it. Like, a whole bunch of Seals players are standing out there and they're all excited to try their hand at the catch, and the bleachers are full of smiling spectators, and it's a beautiful day, and oh my God, what a wonderful event. And oh, look at that. Here comes the first ball. It's floating down so daintily. Here it comes. It's flying through the sky on this beautiful day. It's almost touching how it floats through the air like that, and blam! It crashes into the bleachers way off course, and it cracks the wooden bleacher seat like it's made of balsa wood, and it bounces 100 feet back up into the air, and absolute pandemonium breaks out. Like, it's just now dawning on these people how completely insane and dangerous this is. Like, everybody is ducking and running for cover, and before you know it, the baseball field is empty. Like, every single player lost their nerve. Every single one of them is sitting in the dugout now, hiding. They are terrified of this falling baseball. Except for old Joe Sprinz. He's still out there. He's standing all alone. He's got his mitt above his head, and he's ready for the next ball. Every single one of his teammates has run screaming for cover, but not him. He's not giving up. Now, you might be thinking that Joe has got some kind of like big, grand reasoning that's giving him this courage, right? Like, maybe he's getting paid a whole bunch of money if he actually catches the ball, or maybe he promised his dying mother that he's gonna catch it. But no, there's nothing like that. In fact, the only thing that's going through Joe Sprinz's head, the only thing that's keeping him on that field is a phrase. God hates a coward. He can't stop thinking it. That is his entire motivation. Like, Joe Sprinz said that he's going to catch the ball, so he's going to stay out there and he's going to catch the ball. Second drop. Here it comes. Here we go. Down, 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 and whoa, it looks like this one is a little bit more on target. And Joe is running, and he's running, and he's trying to get underneath it, and whew, the ball smashes into the dirt, just a little bit out of reach. And Joe, he kind of shakes himself off, and he recovers his footing, and he looks down, and he realizes that the ball has dug a crater into the ground. A hole has been gouged into the earth by this ball. But God hates a coward. Third ball, here we go. Down it falls. Down, down, down. Joe is running around. He's trying to get underneath it. And at some point in the free fall of the third baseball, the manager for the Seals kind of has like a moment of clarity where he realizes that his catcher is out there trying to get underneath a ball that just smashed a wooden bleacher into splinters and pounded a big hole into the field. Like, this is real dangerous. This has serious potential to get ugly. So the manager, he raises his hand to his mouth and he's just about to yell at Joe, like, Joe, hey, get out of there, get out of there. This is crazy. Get out of the way of the ball. But before he can utter a single word, the ball hits Joe square in the face. And Joe stumbles forward, he falls to the ground, and he spits 3 front teeth out into the grass. Doctors and teammates, they rush out onto the field, they surround Joe to check on him, and they're just trying to hustle him off the field so they can get him to the doctor. And during the whole commotion, a few photographers are able to capture some pretty wild pictures. Like, in this one in particular, somebody's trying to hold Joe's teeth in his mouth, according to the caption. But poor Joe, he's got a whole lot more problems to deal with than just some missing teeth. Like, after he got to the hospital, it was discovered that his jaw had been totally shattered, broken in 12 places, a compound fracture. Doctors had to, like, tie it back together with surgical wire. Just like an unbelievable amount of damage here. Like, Joe told the newspapers that he thought the blimp itself had fallen out of the sky and crashed down upon him. Interestingly too, Joe would later swear that that ball never even touched his glove. Like, it hit him directly in the face. But the doctors told him, no, that ball had to have bounced off your glove or something, because if it had just hit you dead on, you would be dead. Like, even to this day, some sources still claim that Joe caught the ball and then the force of the impact drove his mitt into his face, and that's what broke his jaw. But if you trust the man himself, he never actually had a hand on it. So it's tough to say for sure. Like, all we know is that it messed him up real bad, regardless of if it hit him in the glove or just hit him in the face. And of course, team management right away tried to minimize Joe's injuries. Like, they're telling the newspapers not to worry about old Joe and he'll be back in like 2 weeks. But of course, it took way longer than that. Like, months would pass before Joe would pull on a catcher's mitt again. And even when he finally did, he discovered that his mental injuries were just as hard to heal from as the shattered jaw. Like, every night he would dream of that white speck coming down through the sky, cracking him in the skull. And every time he's on the field, he finds himself cowering in fear of every pop fly, ducking away from the ball. But if there's anything we know about old Joe, it's that he doesn't give up. And after a lot of rehab and a lot of mental recuperation, Joe Sprinz was actually able to play several more seasons as a professional baseball player. God hates a coward. Oh, and eventually Joe was even able to like laugh about the incident too. Like, I found plenty of interviews with Joe where he brings up the blimp drop as like a punchline, especially later in his life when he became a coach. He, like for example, here he is telling his players to play courageously, to show some heart, some hustle, but don't do anything stupid, don't go too far, and don't try and catch a baseball dropped out of a blimp. Still though, despite Joe's recovery, the blimp debacle signaled the end of extreme baseball catching. Like, the manager for the Seals declared that there was no way he was ever going to let any of his players do any of these stunts ever again. And for the most part, the rest of the baseball world kind of followed his lead. Like, nobody made any more real attempts at an undisputed, record-breaking baseball catch for decades. Until 2013, when a certain something happened. something that inspired me to make this video, something that I literally would have never done all this research without. A man named Zach Hampel uploaded a video to YouTube of him trying to catch a baseball dropped out of a helicopter flying 1,050 feet overhead. So donned in full catcher's gear with a mask and everything, he did it. He caught the ball and he broke the record and he took on the challenge and he came out on top. Congrats, Zach. But, you know, as cool as that is, that catch is not what inspired me to make this video. No, what inspired me to make this video is this YouTube comment on the video that somebody wrote 9 years ago complaining that Zach Hampel caught the ball using a padded glove. Like, shut your mouth, Ian. Joe Sprinz didn't get his face exploded for you to be talking ish about falling baseballs. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you next time.